I begin with a very delicate question this morning, not the sort of question one usually encounters in worship, either because we do not usually bring such matters into worship, or because the subject is so very delicate that we tiptoe around it lest problematic feelings get stirred up. But I believe we're all grown-ups here. You've shown yourselves to be a congregation not afraid to venture into difficult areas. So, my delicate question is, what part of your physical appearance would you most like to change if the opportunity presented itself? Another way of asking the question might be, how would you like to look different? Or still another approach might be, what aspect of your body has forever been a source of exasperation, negative self-image for you? Or still another way to ask the question might be, according to the cultural standards that are all around us, and that we cannot help but absorb on some level, even when we disagree with them, according to which of those standards about desirable appearance do you most fall short? I never ask a congregation a question that I'm not willing to answer myself. Though my own answer to this particular question has shifted over time, so that the answer I might have given as a young adult is not the same answer today, or the answer I had as an awkward adolescent is very different from the answer I reached in middle age. But one part of my appearance that has remained on the list ever since it was first called to my attention in a well-meaning but misguided comment from my mother is my ankles. There you go. Look at that. A strange choice, I know, given that most people might choose a more conspicuous aspect of appearance to wish to change, but for me, it's just those ankles. My maternal grandmother and my own mother and me and my youngest sister all have legs that do not taper nicely towards the ankles, but remain stubbornly wide, so that each of us would say we are cursed with big ankles. I suppose there might have been a sport that I could have pursued where having big ankles is an asset, but I never found that sport. So whenever I look in mirrors, no matter my age, I see those non-tapering calves with the broad ankles and sigh in disappointment. Our culture gives us images of the ideal physical appearance that almost nobody measures up to, and then encourages us to feel dissatisfaction about the disparity, to go on intense diet and exercise programs to address the disparity, to hate ourselves when our efforts show little or no change in the disparity, and to adopt ways of thinking and behaving across the board that seek in some way to avoid, cover up, or minimize whatever it is about our appearance that's not in sync with ideal cultural standards. Women especially suffer from this impossible ideal, but that ideal is there for men as well. Nobody meets the ideal, and yet it stays before us, nagging at us, eliciting defensiveness from us in the form of our saying, well, it's what's inside a person that counts most. And we do believe that, even though a little voice keeps saying, yes, but those ankles. Or your big nose, or your male pattern baldness, or your ears that stick out, or that skin sagging under your neck, or your short height, or the squint of your eyes. Are you sure what's inside is what matters most? Ideals of any sort can be useful or destructive, depending on how they're employed. Because religious traditions particularly work in the realm of ideals, Understanding what those ideals truly mean and how they are to be translated into belief and behavior is crucial for ensuring that the ideals do good rather than harm. One of the features of Unitarian Universalism that I've often appreciated is our usual resistance to idealistic patterns. Oh, we each have our own ideals, and those do come into play in church life. But in theory, at least, and often in practice, we set aside ideals, preferring to work things out as we go along, to be willing to be in process about pretty much everything, which complicates how we understand and step into transcendence, our theme for our worship services this month. Transcendence points beyond what is present, lifts beyond wherever we are and whatever we're doing to a new state of being, a wider experience. But just what does transcendence look like in a non-creedal, open-ended tradition like ours? The movement of transcendence is towards an ideal, but we tend not to set ideals before us and then work to reach them. Our expectation as Unitarian Universalists is the expectation of ongoing spiritual growth, or in the words of our fifth principle, we affirm and promote acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth. And spiritual growth does carry with it echoes of transcendence, that we will somehow increase our ability to see more, to understand more. Yet what does that growth look like exactly? What criteria do I use to assess whether I'm better today spiritually than I was, say, 5 years ago? I had no trouble coming up with an aspect of my physical appearance I would like to change. How about some aspect of my spiritual self that has never seemed quite right, that seems perpetually to get me stuck somewhere or rebound in ways that hurt the people I love? If I could change one part of my spiritual being, what would that be? And having zeroed in on what needs changing, just how do I determine whether something, a practice, a teaching, a book, actually supports change and growth, instead of simply confirming where I am at present and telling me I'm evolved enough and I can just coast from here on? An old adage for ministers says we are to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And while we understand well the first half of that advice, we get uneasy with the second half. We hear all around us all the time how much people come to church to enjoy the presence of like-minded others, to experience a sense of community, to settle into a place and way of being that is familiar, all descriptions that sound like they put a premium on remaining comfortable and avoiding affliction. Yet the push towards transcendence implied in the challenge to grow means inevitable times of discomfort. How much discomfort in church are you willing to take before you would say, enough already, and leave? Growth in theory is wonderful. Growth in practice is often hard and requires often a long time before results are seen. Mythology scholar Joseph Campbell tells of advice attributed to Native American peoples as part of a coming-of-age ceremony. The youth, having completed tasks and endured ordeals to test whether they are truly ready for the demands of full adulthood, are told, "As you travel through life, you will come upon a great chasm. Jump. It is not as far across as you may think. When Reverend Cheryl announced her plans to leave her ministry here, you as a congregation were set on a path leading to the great chasm that is a ministerial transition. Well, at first that chasm may have seemed entirely jumpable. After all, there are rules provided for finding a new settled minister, and you just march through a defined process, and you have a small leap at the end when you vote to call that candidate, and then you're on the other side in a new chapter of congregational life. Yet transitions tend not to be as simple as they first appear, a truth you've discovered repeatedly this past year. You learn that your building and your technology were not ready for a new chapter, and suddenly that chasm was quite a bit wider. You gathered yourself, you mustered up the necessary resources of money and volunteers and energy, you jumped, and in a couple of weeks, you will find yourself on the other side of a chasm which truly was not as far across as it had seemed last fall. But another chasm awaits you in your second year of transition, a very different sort of chasm than the obvious chasm of buildings and technology. The next chasm is all about you as the people of this congregation. Who are you? What do you dream of being? How are you going to grow? Do you even want to grow? Your sanctuary has gotten crowded this year. Parking continues to be challenging. And as you learned when you did it before, to have 2 services on a Sunday morning requires a lot of volunteers and a great deal of flexibility in changing comfortable patterns and schedules. What are your plans for the chasm of Sunday mornings here? The burden of the annex, that trailer out back, remains because of a lack of funding to remove it. And the driveway filled with more potholes than driveway cannot be repaired until the heavy equipment has come in to remove the annex. How long do you plan to stand at the edge of that chasm, believing it is too far across to jump? As always happens when a congregation turns towards new ministry and your search committee begins engaging you with questions about the future here, are you going to say you like what you have and want more of the same, and with such answers say, you don't want to jump any more chasms? Have you looked to see what might be on the other side that would be so compelling you could not resist jumping, even at the risk of a painful fall? You say you long to be more of an intergenerational congregation, but to accomplish that will require a willingness to change worship styles, times that meetings happen, to rethink gatherings so that they are welcome to children and not just adults. That's such a wide chasm, that particular one. It would be so much simpler to just stick with the way things work now. The second year of a transition involves work on the congregational covenant. Can anyone here quote me a line from your covenant? Do you even know you have a covenant? A covenant is a set of promises for how you will be in relationship with one another and what you will do when conflict comes, as it always does. Are you willing to promise to hang in there when things get rocky and people state opinions you think are ridiculous and decisions are made that you cannot agree with? Many congregations choose to sidestep that particular chasm, the chasm of a covenant and the promises it brings. And then the chasm about what ministry will look like next year. Is anybody ready to jump across that one? Being willing to jump the chasms of congregational transition is how you collectively, as one body, move into transcendence. It's how you grow spiritually beyond just having a facelift, how you truly grow. But it is so risky. Once upon a time, violinist Itzhak Perlman came on stage for a concert at Lincoln Center in New York City. If you've ever heard or seen Perlman in performance, you know the simple act of getting on stage is a challenge for him. Stricken with polio as a child, he has braces on both legs and walks with the aid of 2 crutches. Once on stage, he settles laboriously into a chair, undoes the clasps on the braces so he can position his legs, then takes his violin from an assistant and nods to the conductor. The same routine unfolded for this particular performance until something went drastically wrong. A few bars into the piece, one of the strings on his violin broke with a loud snap. Any of you who play a stringed instrument know that such an event has only limited solutions. Perlman would have to halt the performance and either find another violin, take a violin from one of the orchestra players on stage, or have the audience take an unscheduled intermission while the broken string was replaced. But Perlman did none of this. Rather, he closed his eyes, signaled to the conductor to resume the piece from where they had stopped, and he began playing. It should be impossible to play a concerto without the soloist having a full set of strings. That's just the way such things work. Perlman, however, has often refused to acknowledge just the way things work, and he did it that night. You could almost see him modulating, changing, recomposing the piece in his head. At times it even sounded as though he was retuning the strings to get sounds from them they had never made before. The piece continued with all the passion and power it could ever have. Perlman finished. Silence held for a moment. Then the audience rose to their feet, cheering and applauding. After acknowledging the audience response, Perlman waved his bow to ask for silence and signaled for a microphone. Wiping the sweat from his forehead, he said quietly, "You know, sometimes it is the artist's task to find out how much music you can make with what you have left." We all move along as individuals on a life journey, as a congregation on a journey of transition. Around the next bend, there waits another chasm for us. None of us, if we're wise, will simply walk up and jump. That's foolhardy. Some will try to find another way that avoids having to jump, but that takes a lot of time and may ultimately just lead you to some other chasm. Most, maybe all of us, will stand there staring across the chasm and wonder how on earth we're going to get across, whether we're strong enough to jump across and actually make it to the other side, given what we presently lack in terms of muscle, in terms of money, time, resources. Much of the time we feel as if we're operating with a few broken strings. But music is always possible. And the elders tell the youth that the chasm will turn out to be not as far across as it looks. Can we trust that counsel? Can we trust one another enough to join hands and start running and believe that somehow all of us together, jumping together, having faith in one another, having faith in our own jumping capacities, even when strings are broken and resources are small, having faith in the mystery that comes to provide grace in unexpected ways, can we believe that against all odds, we will land on the other side? Maybe shaken up a bit, maybe with another broken string, wondering, how did we pull that off? And then turn with delight to walk into our new home. Can we believe that? May it be so. Amen.